Buon pomeriggio a tutti, benvenuti al nostro settimo dialogo. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Marhaban bikum fi liqa'ina السابع من حوارات حول الابتكار. موضوع اليوم هو ثقافة الأكل. Good afternoon, dear guests, dear audience, and welcome back to our dialogues. All of them are inspired by the global experience of the pandemic with the physical isolation it has brought. And they all focus on the impact of physical distance on personal cultural experience, as well as the social fruition of culture. Being in the Emirates, a country at the forefront in the use of digital technologies, we also consider their greater or lesser capacity for supplying culture in isolation. This, to be able to imagine a post-pandemic future in which not everything will return as it was before. Through the previous 6 meetings, and thanks to the distinguished guests we had with us, we learned an important lesson. Culture, in its diverse expressions, from language to art to the world of education, is strictly tied to physicality and to the use of all the 5 senses we are endowed with. In this way, we were able to highlight an insolvable tension between technology and humanism. A clear case of the limits of technology is the culture of food. There's no need to insist on the relationship between culture and food. Just think that the word culture comes from the Latin verb colere, which means to cultivate the land. So when we say culture, we are implicitly comparing, for example, a wheat field to the human mind and our knowledge to a piece of bread. And we are also implying how vital culture is for a complete human life. Let's also recall the tongue, which is the organ of taste and of verbal communication. In my mother tongue, sapere, that is to know, and sapore, that is taste, share the same etymology, both originating from the Latin verb sapere, which means at the same time to have flavor and to have wisdom. We can think of insipid, which means unsalty, and irrelevant or meaningless. This relation between food and knowledge occurs in many other languages, for example in Arabic, where dhawq indicates taste, but also perception, intellectual discernment, and the aptitude to appreciate beauty. Conviviality, eating together at the same table, is therefore a sharing of culture and could be a sharing of cultures. On this subject, I would like to leave the floor to Carlo Pizzati, a writer as well as an academic who lives between Italy, India, and the Arab Emirates. As a writer, Carlo Pizzati impressed me, in particular for one of his novels, Mappile, where he also talks about his wedding lunch. As a professor, Carlo Pizzati teaches communication theory at the Asian College of Journalism in Chennai, India, with classes focusing on the use of the internet in the transmission of culture. So, Carlo Pizzati, I'm sure you have a lot to tell us today, a lot of food for thought, and of course, I don't use this expression by accident. Please, Carlo.
Well, thank you, Director Lidia Grandi, and thank you to your viewers. Yes, you mentioned my class and my memoir, Napile, which means son-in-law. The class, the memoir has a preceding memoir called Bending Over Backwards, which investigates the relationship between spirituality and technology. And my class investigates, is a postgraduate class, it investigates how internet is affecting the way in which we absorb knowledge. We study a lot Marshall McLuhan, whose famous axiom is the medium is the message, which means what? It means that whenever there is a new technology, a new invention, this technology alters the relationship of the people in the society in which this technology enters. This is what message in the medium is. The message of a medium is how it changes the way people relate to each other. So, for example, electricity changed society by introducing something very life-saving like nighttime surgery, or something very fun like nighttime sports, or being able to dine in the evening because of electricity, being able to be here right now. And one of the children of electricity is the internet. And how internet has affected us is difficult to study. We do it constantly because the way in which it affects us constantly changes and evolves. So we are constantly studying how the relationship between people are affected by internet. Now, we had the pandemic, and the pandemic has accelerated the way in which internet is affecting us, because of course we are all forced to be home. We cannot see each other right now. We are having a webinar, and this is the proof of the acceleration of how internet is forced to be used by us. The important thing to understand is when there is a new invention like internet, or like electricity, or like telecommunication. I've worked for a while as an executive for Telecom Italia when we were trying to launch the internet in the year 2002, 2003. And at the time, no one believed that SMS messages would make it. Everybody was betting on beepers, for example. And then SMS technology, only the Italians were investing in at the time, became the main technology, which is now followed by WhatsApp, WeChat, Line. And so we didn't plan it that way. Whenever there's a human interface put on a new medium, it sort of evolves in a spontaneous, semi-organic manner. So we don't know what's happening with him when internet and the pandemic is put together. And we have to be careful because there are a lot of surprises and things that we were not expecting. I have some anecdotal evidence, for example. Speaking to an editor-in-chief of an important European newspaper, he was telling me that the fact that they were forced to move the newsroom at home when they discovered one case of COVID-19, they immediately realized that the efficient reporters and writers were even more efficient at home alone, because, of course, they were just as fast and they actually saved a lot of time. And the inefficient reporters and writers were actually exposed in their inefficiencies because they couldn't hide their inefficiencies within the group. So this was a surprise of the smart working solution. I talked to a bookstore owner who had hosted web launches online, convinced that they were doing the book launches just in order to have fidelization with their clients. They were not going to be able to sell books. Well, actually what happened is he started receiving book orders from cities that were 4 or 5 hours drive from their bookstore, because seeing the book launch online in a similar context as this made them want to buy the book from that bookstore. And then, of course, we have the anecdotal evidence of what this medium does in love relationship between people. A lot of people that surprisingly, we thought that maybe they would become more fond of each other as the distance makes the heart grow fonder. Instead, anecdotal evidence indicates that it's sort of a truth test. And so the relationships that are not working, they break up more easily, because after the lockdown, people realize, well, I really want to see this person, not really, because it's been put to a test of distance and of, at the same time, trying to understand the person. So this is only anecdotal evidence, but it proves that we're in front of a new phenomenon that would be interesting to study, but it would be full of surprises, as it already is. Because can technology be a surrogate for reality? It's the question, right? The main question right now. I think the answer is, it depends who's asking it and who is asking it for. Definitely for boomers and Generation X like myself, I'm 54, it is difficult for us to accept that. But for millennials and digital natives, people who are called Generation Z, for them already experience is, has already moved on the screen where we are now. It's already here. So most of their lives, experience and dialogue and the way in which they meet each other, it's already here. So the question, it can be answered differently in their case, because the way in which they relate to each other is already much more mediated by the medium of technology. I remember seeing a silent concert for the first time in a major city in Italy, in Vicenza, where people are silently listening to their own different 3 types of music. I don't know if you've seen any of those. And there you see that for those used to the Dionysiac live concerts and convivial experiences of sharing, it seems a bit cold and artificial, of course, but for them, they are teenagers. They were teenagers at the time, and they're grown with this way of experiencing music. The answer has to be different. I mean, like, they don't know any different. Most of the experience is already there. It cannot be said that our idea as Generation X or boomers of experience is better. It's simply very, very different because we have grown up with what we call analog experience. To end my intervention here, there is a very interesting book by a thinker called Ivan Illich, ILIC. He wrote a book called Tools of Conviviality, in which he defined conviviality as the autonomous and creative intercourse among persons and the intercourse of persons with their environment. The environment has become the internet, and so it changes. And so the need for conviviality changes as well. Can it be satisfied with technology? My conclusion is it really depends. It depends on the age of the generations that are answering it. Now, there is one final question, which is the real test of one experience of conviviality, which is food around the table and around drinking and sharing a bottle. Can that be a surrogate? We've seen as soon as the lockdown opened in Italy, for example, and many countries in Europe, but let's stay with Italy because it was the first one hit with it. Immediately, this generation Z I just described and millennials, the first thing they needed more than anything else was to go out in the street and share a bottle together and drink from the same bottle from the different glasses. And so I think that that's the final litmus test where experience is fighting its real experience is fighting its last battle. We tried here in NYU, Abu Dhabi, with the Italians in the faculty to have virtual aperitif in the beginning of the lockdown. We did it only once. It was nice, we saw each other, but it was not substitutable to the real experience, the real physical experience. So I leave it up to you now, since you are in the business of conviviality, and up to Deepak to discuss this. But my conclusion is this is the last bastion is, of course, the conviviality around the table, around the pleasure of food. If you try to order your own food and then discuss about it and try to have a dinner online, like Indians are having a lot of, you talked about my Indian wedding on the beaches of Tamil Nadu, like Indians are having virtual. Of course, it's very difficult to substitute that because there is something unspoken in the dialogue that cannot be substituted in the gaze. So that's my 8 minutes or less.
Thank you very much, Carlo. Now, according to the Islamic tradition, Abraham did not eat or drink unless he had a guest at his table. And for this very reason, the father of monotheists is also considered the father of hospitality, not to mention the Bible and the story of Abraham and his generous offer of food to the 3 visitors, or in the New Testament, the command, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. A command, to tell the truth, very important, but not much practiced. Also, the Greeks, and in particular Epicurus, maintain that before looking for something to eat and drink, one must find someone to do it with. In fact, we cannot talk about conviviality without mentioning hospitality. And on these themes, conviviality and hospitality, I am very pleased to introduce Sahar Al-Awadhi, the first female Emirati pastry chef. Sahar studied communications and design management at the American University of Sharjah, and her career started handling social media at Zayed University. Then, as a pastry chef, she specialized in Paris. I haven't had the chance to taste your desserts yet, dear Sahar, but I have seen them on the internet, and I understand that they appeal not only to the sense of taste, but also to the sense of sight. So I give you the floor on hospitality, communication, and beauty. And to this, since I know you always from the internet, I think I should add also sustainability. Please, Sahar.
Thank you, Ida. So for me, I think, you know, I'm always torn because hospitality, a big part of hospitality is human interaction. People mostly, they come to restaurants for the food, but they'll always come back for the service. when you go to a restaurant and you feel that you've been treated specially and you feel that you've had a great experience, it really makes a difference in the way that you eat the food or you experience the food. And so I do feel like they do come hand in hand together. But with this pandemic right now, I think technology has played a big role in helping people connect more with food. I don't think I ever remember any time in my life where people have cooked so much and shared their cooking so much. And that's encouraged other people to do the same. There were so many instances where people were holding webinars or workshops where they were cooking online, and that, you know, it's, I guess you could call it a technological conviviality, because it still brings people together. You're still eating the same thing, cooking together, except, you know, there's a medium, most of the time Zoom, where it helps you do that, where otherwise you probably wouldn't have been able to if technology didn't exist at that time. Same, you've never seen in the world fast enough, you know, technology advancing to get food to people. Well, while everything was shutting down in the world, probably the only things that were staying open were food service restaurants. And the people that were connecting them were the likes of Deliveroo and Kareem, that were trying to deliver the food to the people who were away from their families, getting the food that they wanted, the comfort food that they wanted to them, to make sure that during this time, they felt a little bit better. So technology really played a huge role in, you know, making sure, or trying to find sort of a leeway for people to feel a little bit more at home. If you were from Lebanon and you felt like you were missing your family and you couldn't see them, Deliveroo could deliver your Lebanese food in less than 45 minutes. And that made it a little bit better. So, you know, there's always a fine line. I think that will never change the experience that you get when you go to a restaurant and a waiter or a manager remembers your name and remembers your order and remembers how you like to eat your steak or any of that stuff. But I do think there's been a great shift, and I don't think that it's bad. Like I said, I think it's like a virtual conviviality or a technological conviviality revolution that's happened in the last couple of months that's really more connected people than not.
Thank you very much, Sahar Al-Awadhi. Here in the Emirates, a country truly founded on hospitality, foreign nationals constitute over 80% of the population, with a strong Indian presence. Of Indian origins is Deepak Unnikrishnan, a writer and a university professor who was raised in the UAE and who lives and works in Abu Dhabi, Chicago, and New York. Deepak Unnikrishnan is a writer. You are the celebrated author of Temporary People, a book set in the UAE on identity, immigration, and exile. As a professor, you teach literature and creative writing at NYU Abu Dhabi. So I would like to know your opinion on the following statement. Culinary culture defines peoples as much as their languages do. Ingredients are like words, and traditional dishes are not far from the masterpieces of a given literature. Please, Deepak.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. I'll do my best in the 8 minutes that I have and probably fail. It's interesting when you talk about language. Most people are thinking about, you know, mother tongues, whether it's Hindi, Malayalam, Arabic, Tagalog. But I would push back a little against that, because food is also language. Movement like dance is also language. Music is also language. And I say all of these things simply because you never know what food could do to you. It depends on context. Because of COVID, I mean, technically we are living in an age of sickness. It's not a happy time, but we try to be optimistic. But when I take a taxi cab and the gentleman driving me is Ugandan, and we start talking about food, and I just ask him, do you miss matoke? And usually they smile and say, yeah, I do. How do you know? And it's not because I'm an expert. I'm not Sahar. I haven't read enough. But I know it registers very, very differently because he's thinking of a bunch of things now. He's thinking of taste, as you mentioned earlier. He's thinking of smell, depending on who's cooking it. He's thinking of family, perhaps friends, a lover, a girlfriend, a wife, a brother. And it's hard for him to explain all of this and articulate all of this to me, a stranger, in the 5 to 10 minutes that it takes to drive me from point A to point B. But it registers. And I say this because when I was a young and very poor student in the United States, and this is not before the internet still existed, but you didn't have the tech you had now, WhatsApp, and the other goodies that you have presently. So I ended up walking the streets looking for comfort in the foods that I used to miss. And at the end of the day, it was basically what my mother used to cook. And this was in New Jersey. And we would have strange habits because, as you stated earlier, I grew up in Abu Dhabi, it's home. So we would do strange things with the food because our relatives didn't understand. My parents are from Kerala. We have a dish called sambar, which is basically lentil stew. You have it with rice. I used to have sambar with rice, with yogurt, which is what you do, and cheese balls, specifically pofaki, Omani pofaki. If you explain this to people outside of the UAE or the Khalid, they will not understand. They will not, and people are smiling as I see the screens, and they're nodding their head, like we get it. Most people didn't. I didn't find pofaki in the United States, so I used substitutes because I found sambar and rice and yogurt. And at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to mimic what feels okay to you, even when you're in isolation. Because that was the hardest thing to sort of grapple with as a poor young student. And I know we're talking about conviviality, but I think what I've thought about quite a bit nowadays is also equity. Because for a lot of people who live and work here, this is the normal. You're not with family. You can't share the things that you genuinely want to share with them, irrespective of how great the tech is. For some of my students, it's also been quite sobering because I teach at NYU Abu Dhabi and I love teaching there. And most of my students were thrilled and they're always optimistic. But when COVID hit, they recognized that there are other things they really needed to think about again. Their nationality, borders, when can they go home, what happens afterwards. And then they started getting a little bit despondent. And me as a teacher, I didn't know what to do because I'm here. So even if I do that, I'm not there. Yeah, I can't sense them properly. So you do the best that you can. So I guess my answer to the question that you posed is I really don't know what the right answer is. What I do know is when we think about language, we should think about a bunch of things. What we speak, what we eat, what we forget listening to and we want to listen to again. And we should also remind ourselves that sometimes we're okay, but there are also other people out there who are not necessarily so. And what do we do with that? And I'll end by saying I teach a creative writing class, but before that I used to teach a class called street food. And I came this close to actually sending an email to Sahar and asking her whether she'd speak to my students. And there's one assignment that I gave my students that everybody struggled with. It's very basic. They had to go to the dining hall, order rice with lentil or anything, and they had to eat it with their fingers. And so you're talking about the best of the best, the creme de la creme, who've passed everything they needed to pass. They will be our future. But the students struggled with it. Because all of a sudden, what I'm asking them to do is something very basic where they have to sit down, use their fingers in a public space, felt unreal, surreal, strange. And that was interesting to me because I grew up eating rice with my fingers. And all of a sudden, they had to think about class, they had to think about equity, and they had to think about, and perhaps I should end with this, taste. And the reason I eat with my fingers is because that's how we did it at home. And that's how we continue to do it at home. It reminds me of my mother. And it's not that I wanted my students to remember their own mothers, but I wanted them to sort of understand that even though we think we know what the world is, sometimes we don't. So we do strange things like look for pafaki in the United States, like I did many, many years ago. So, something I still eat to this day. So I'll end with that. Shout out to Omani pafaki. And that doesn't answer anything, but hopefully that'll give you something to think about.
Thank you very much, Deepak Unnikrishnan, for your very wise words. And now it is a pleasure to listen to the point of view of another most celebrated young Emirati chef, Khaled Saadi, who likes to mix the Emirates tradition with foreign and especially French cooking methods. Please, Khaled.
So yeah, well, first of all, I apologize for the delayed arrival. I'm super happy to be a part of this conversation. I was actually just at a food competition. It just shows you how much food is important to everyone, even governmental entities. So I was actually working with a governmental entity here in Abu Dhabi, and they were thinking about ways to bring their employees together. And their idea was to host a food competition amongst divisions. And what this had led to was an incredible performance by surprising talents that they had within their entity. And it was just amazing to see people work together collaboratively to present incredible dishes. Each person, I would say, had a different background, and you can see that on the dishes that were reflected. And this is just to show that at the end of the day, food is the one thing that will always be mutual amongst every culture and every internationality. And just again to talk about some of the experience I've had in terms of trying to infuse Emirati cuisine with international flavors. It's just something that, as mentioned earlier by Deepak, it's just incredible to be able to reflect something from your own life onto a plate. Like something, it can be something as simple and nostalgic as putting pufa, which by the way, we all did. I always ate, white rice, some sort of curry and chips. It was either the pofaki, the Armani one. There's, I could just name plenty. And I was a very fat kid, so I know what I'm talking about. All right. but it's just something that once you dive into and you look at the results that come out after working with all the incredible ingredients that we've came to know and learned to love, especially when you understand the process that went into growing the produce that goes onto your plate, all the efforts that are being put, especially from our leaders here in this country, the way that they are supporting the food scene and to try as much as possible to keep everything sustainable is just amazing. And also all the achievements that had happened throughout the process until today is really inspiring. And again, it's just an ongoing learning experience, and it's something that we will continuously work on improving. Today, we're working with methods that are giving us healthier, cleaner options that we did not know of as close as 10 years ago. So it's just a great time to be working in this industry for myself. Yes, this year has been really difficult on a lot of people, but I saw through an initiative that we've had, here at our restaurant, that a lot of people wanted to support, a lot of people wanted to come together, a lot of people wanted to help each other, which shows us how unified our community is. And the way that we were able to give back was to give them a platform where they would be able to help us reach a specific amount on a daily level, and be able to push out as many meals to those who were hit hardest, I want to say, those who were less fortunate throughout these times, the ones who weren't able to gather food to sustain their daily intake. And those were the people that we were targeting. And just to see how everyone came together, mostly in the food scene, to be able to support using food was just incredible. So it wasn't just a financial standpoint. I saw a lot of people donating actual food, like they had sent us bags of rice. Even suppliers that we were working with who would normally work for profit, they actually just gave us a lot of food that they had stored. And it just shows that ultimately it's the one thing that we all need, and it's the one thing that everyone was able to participate with. And yeah, and again, it's just, again, I don't want to be repeating myself, but it's just that food is definitely something that brings us always together.
Thank you very much, Khaled Saadi. Our last speaker today is Laila Ali Almahri from the Training Department in the Ministry of Education, UAE. Dear Laila, welcome. Happy to have you with us. I leave it to you to conclude our meeting. Please, Laila.
Thank you. I would like to extend my appreciation and thanks to everyone here today. I just want to wrap up with some thoughts that reflects me as Emirati, and also reflects the entity that I work for, the Ministry of Education. I just want to highlight some important points from what you guys have said. For example, Carlo shed the light on how different mediums affect us in ways that we never planned for. For example, we used to have Eid visits, and we used to visit our families during the Eid time. But due to the pandemic, we couldn't do that. We only replace it with the technology using video conferences and messages as well. That also includes like other occasions. For example, I'd say my sister had a baby and I couldn't see her for 3 months. I can only see the baby's pictures and photos. Also, Sahar, with her perspective of hospitality and people share their cooking experiences. It reminds me of how much we missed the Friday family lunch. We used together every Friday. I think this is something common with all Emirati people, where they have seafood and fish. Maybe Sahar and Khaled will agree with me on this. And it also reminds me of how much I missed the Friday family gathering and my father telling stories during the feast. Instead of that, we only shared photos of the food we cook at home separately, and also we shared recipes, my sister and I. The other thing that takes me also to what Deepak was saying with his very nice expression, food is language. A good example of that is that people here, a common thing here that people like, maybe I'll speak about not teenagers, but youth people. They're very interested and keen on coffee and all the coffee types and all the coffee drinks. What happened during the pandemic, people were not able to get the coffee drinks that they wanted to. That reminds me of a session that we did here in the Ministry of Education in the training department, where we hosted a chef who spoke about all types of coffee drinks and the coffee beans and how to make your favorite coffee at home back then when people were not able to go to their coffee houses or coffee shops to have their favorite drinks. Also, Khaled, thank you so much for your contribution. And something that you said I really liked, which is food is the only thing that is considered mutual among people around the world. This is very true. I like your passion about the different ingredients that you talked about. And it also reminds me of a survey that we sent out to people, asking them during the pandemic time of what kind of things they would like to have, especially in cooking. And the most thing people were saying that because at that time they couldn't go out, they couldn't get the cooking ingredients that they wanted. So they said, we need some training, or we need a session on how to cook food. We need recipes of food and ingredients that we can only find at home, simple ingredients that can be found in every home. And also they asked for healthy food for all family members, food for children, for senior people. So we managed to do that as well. That was really great and helpful, even for myself. And just to wrap up, I would like to say, it make us like think, would technology replace all the food passion that we have physically, that we used to have physically? And maybe it won't, but inshallah for the future, I'm just I'm very optimistic that inshallah in the future things are going to be different. I really miss the gatherings that we used to have, like even at work when we used to sit together in our lunch breaks and have conversations. All these things do not exist anymore. So inshallah, hopefully things will get back to normal. I don't know if Aido, you want to add anything before we finish?
Thank you very much, Laila.
Well,
I don't know if someone was speaking, but I think we are running out of time. And so thank you very much to all of you. Really, I appreciated very, very much what you all said. So thank you also, grazie mille to our public. See you again on December 6th on our last webinar entitled Embracing Solitude, Lessons from Outer Space. We will have with us 2 astronauts, the Italian Paolo Nespoli and the Emirati Hassan Mansouri. Then we'll have Francesca Matteucci, Professor of Stellar Physics at the University of Trieste, and land artist Manal Adawayan. We will open the webinar with a video message from our Vice Foreign Minister Marina Sereni and His Excellency Hussein Ibrahim Al-Hamadi, Minister of Education in the UAE, will also honor our institute with his greetings. Goodbye to all. See you soon, I hope. Bye. Bye-bye.